Welcome back to the Daily Drum on WHUR 96.3 HD2 and Sirius XM, channel 141. I'm Harold Fisher. We've heard statements like the soul of the nation is at stake, and this is the most important election of our lifetime. But many are beginning to feel a degree of stress and anxiety over the November election. On this Medical Monday edition of the Daily Drum, we have some tips on coping with feelings of impending doom and gloom as the political rhetoric amplifies in the final days of Decision 2024. We will also have details about an upcoming free weekend to just gather, heal, laugh, and if you choose to worship before this election. My guests are Dr. Jeff Menzies, clinical psychologist, and Dr. Frederica Brooks Davis, executive director of Restoration Center Incorporated. Thank you both for joining the conversation. Before we go into this, I want you both to listen to some of the things that have happened just over the past 18 hours, and then we'll talk about it on the other side.
There's literally a floating island of garbage in the middle of the ocean right now. Yeah. I think it's called Puerto Rico.
She is some sick that Hillary Clinton, huh? What a sick son of a The whole party, a bunch of degenerates.
Can you imagine Kamala Harris performing a random, kind, generous act? She is the devil, whoever screamed that out. She is the Antichrist.
Her and her pimp handlers will destroy our country. We need to slaughter this other people.
They're smart and they're vicious, and we have to defeat them. And when I say the enemy from within, the other side goes crazy. They are indeed the enemy from within. And
one follow-up to your remarks about President Trump's rally last night. Some people who watched that made comparisons between a rally that happened at Madison Square Garden in 1939 with neo-Nazis or Nazis back then. Do you see those comparisons? And can you also expand on what he said and what you said yesterday about Puerto Rico?
Donald Trump this is not new about him, by the way. What he did last night is not a discovery. It is just more of the same and maybe more vivid than usual. Donald Trump spends full time trying to have Americans point their finger at each other, fans the fuel of hate and division, and that's why people are exhausted with him. That's why people who formerly have supported Donald Trump, have voted for him, are supporting me, voting for me. People are literally ready to turn the page. They're tired of it.
What I want you both to do before we get into the major conversation is not to talk about the political candidate so much, or your opinions about either side, but give me your thoughts about the kind of vitriol and the back and forth that I just shared an example with you about what that kind of thing over the course of this election season does to people. Dr. Brooks Davis, I'll start with you.
Okay, thank you. So I would say much of what we're seeing in the political is also what we've been seeing on social media. For our young people, when we talk about bullying, name calling, hate speech, that's often what we are faced with on a daily basis, be it in the workplace, for some at home, and on social media. So unfortunately, what should be kind of a model of what we should strive for what our young people should see in leaders, what we are seeing is less of that from some candidates more than others. And that is the unfortunate thing. And to see it over and over again for some who already have low self-esteem, who already feel some of those things, this is just exacerbating some of those feelings and view of self that they've already had.
Dr. Menzies?
Yeah, man, it's a very, very interesting dynamic we're witnessing, experiencing, observing. Again, it's nothing new. I think that what happens is, during these election cycles, the spotlights get brighter. the microphones turn up louder, and the cameras get a little bit more crisp, in their ability to focus on these things. But I mean, we're in this ongoing struggle for equality, for justice. And anytime somebody who has power and their position is being threatened, then what you get is this backlash of fight to the death to maintain the system of power. And unfortunately, fortunately, what we're experiencing right now is a threat to the typical structure of how the American government has been ran, meaning that for the first time, we may very well get a woman at the head. And I think that's a very, it creates this visceral reaction, which then people, they pull out their bag of tricks, resort to like the name calling, the mudslinging and things of that nature. But I want us to be very clear that not one side of the aisle has a monopoly on this type of vitriol. It comes from both sides of the aisle. You have both left and right wing. That was Freudian slip, I guess. Left and right wing, and it was unintentional, but I'll call it out myself. The left and right wing, are both fully capable and have demonstrated their ability to be very gross, very disrespectful, and very violent in the face of pending change.
I want to share some fast facts with you that parallel what both of you were saying. According to the American Psychological Association, 7 out of 10 adults say the future of the nation is a significant source of stress in their lives. And that same survey found that 54% of Americans say they have little or no trust in the U.S. government. 41% say the state of the nation has made them consider moving to a different country, to become an expatriate. And the survey called Stress in America 2024, A Nation in Political Turmoil, found that 82% of Americans say they are worried that people are basing their values and opinions on false or inaccurate information. One of the things that I find fascinating and is that for almost every election that I've had an opportunity to experience and to cover professionally, one side or another has always run around with their hair on fire. Dr. Brooks Davison says, if candidate A gets elected, it's going to be the end of the world. If candidate B gets elected, it's going to be the end of the world. And it causes so much stress, so much worry. And I think it can be argued that after candidate A won or candidate B won, that the person who is stressed out and worried is still here. And they're still talk to me about that how that stress will affect someone and then perhaps drop off, even if they don't like the candidate who won, that they still have a chance to go back and worry about something else.
Yeah, that's a great question. So one thing I would say is the sister to fear, anxiety, I should say, and worry is fear, right? And so this idea that we're trying to tap into the fear that if A wins, then your life is going to be much worse than it already is. It's already connecting with the fear that exists. I would say while fear has always been used to control, right? To control people and to say, this is what you need to do. So it's fear on both sides. Those who are voting, it's fear that our life may be different and worse than what it is now. For those who are running, it's fear that I'm going to lose control. Both sides, there's fear involved, right? So this antagonistic, just mean spirit is coming out of a place of fear. Now, what I am concerned about now, different than maybe in previous years or here of recent, is if we take the situation in Springfield, Ohio, with our Haitian brothers and sisters. These persons are legal immigrants here, already living in a community, but still trying to adjust and navigate there. Well, now, because of a lot of the mean-spirited lies that have happened, there's a focus on them. I don't see that this fear and fear for others of color is going to go away once November 5th goes, and we find out who's going to win. I think this time around, because of the current state that we are in a country, this fear is going to have lasting effects. And that's my concern. The anxiety and the fear, persons are already have lost their jobs. People cannot buy groceries. Inflation is here. So now what happens, regardless of who wins, who's going to buy Pampers? Who's going to ensure that I have a job? The same things that we're seeing clients for now when it relates to anxiety and fear is not going to change because one person is going to be in the office of president, not in the near future. Now, hopefully it will happen, but how do we serve these people well to reduce their stress and anxiety, regardless of who's in the White House come November or really January?
Jeff, I want you to address that, but before we do, I want Dr. Brooks Davis to talk about this event that is coming up that may be a stress reducer, hopefully. Give me the rundown of what it is, when it is, and how can those interested participate?
Sure. Thank you. On Friday, Restoration Center, we are hosting in partnership with Emory AME Church a podcast, a live podcast of a pastor and a therapist. And that's going to be an opportunity for persons. You don't have to be a person of faith, but to come and get some of those questions answered. So when we talk about anxiety and fear, some of those things that are beyond the election, right? We're trying to help address those now. Some fears that persons have about, is the world going to come to an end? What does this look like? And those who are persons of faith can address that there. On Saturday morning, we're going to have a comedian and a pastor come together. That's at Harmony Hall to provide an opportunity for laughter, but also for worship and healing. And so that's what this weekend is about, gathering the community together to worship, to heal, and to laugh.
Mm-hmm. Where is Harmony Hall? What time? How can people participate?
Sure. Friday is at 7 p.m. Emory AME Church in College Park, Maryland. And Saturday, Harmony Hall is located in Fort Washington, Maryland, through the Maryland Parks and Recs, and that's at 10 a.m.
Okay. Free therapy. Show up for that. Definitely here for that. But before we go to a break, quickly, Dr. Menzies, share your thoughts about how some of the stresses that people feel during election time are unfounded.
Yeah, and so you had mentioned earlier in your first part of the question how, it's a spike, and then after the election, it can drop. And I think that spike, just for to veggie back what Dr. Brooks Davis was saying, a lot of people are already dealing with stress and anxiety. And I think that they're elevated is a norm for them. And then during this election time, it spikes. And then that drop after post-election drop back to their normal but potentially pathological state, to me, is indicative of their emotional state being manipulated by the election process, which is why it would drop off, soon after, after the vote is in, the ballots are counted, and the president is selected, then that's what we have, right? And so that's very important for us to understand, because it then allows us to kind of regulate our emotional state when we're going through periods of time like this. It was a few years ago. Secretary Clinton, part of her campaign was, that 3 a.m. phone call. I don't remember if it's 3 a.m., 5 a.m., but they had this
3 a.m. Yep.
You remember that? And
yes.
The commercial had the ominous music playing. What do you do? Who you want to get this phone call about? Some type of terrorist attack, some type of war, whatever it was. And all of that was to play on this pending sense of doom. And so if we pay attention, if our memories are long enough, we'll see that the cycles just continue. They just repeat themselves. You have new characters, new players, but it'd be the same type of rhetoric. It'd be the same manipulation of our emotional state. And I think that once you realize that the external manipulation of the emotion is potentially the cause of what you're currently feeling, it allows for us to separate ourselves from it and then maintain a more healthy perspective as we're going through these processes and through these experiences, which then that post-election dive in the emotional state is not as far of a crash for us. We pretty much hover around our norm, which is always healthy. It's always healthy.
I need to take a quick break, but when we come back, we're going to continue this conversation about election season stress. Don't forget, you can hear this in every edition of the Daily Drum Insight segment via podcast on WHUR.com. The Original Quiet Storm with Raheem Devon is next on WHUR-FM. I'm Harold Fisher. This conversation continues on Sirius XM, channel 141 and 96.3 HD2 in just a few seconds. Welcome back to the Daily Drum on Sirius XM channel 141. I'm Harold Fisher. We continue our Medical Monday discussion about election season stress. My guests are Dr. Jeff Menzies, clinical psychologist, and Dr. Frederica Brooks Davis, executive director of Restoration Center Incorporated. It's one thing to talk about the stress kind of dropping away after Election Day, although as we know, it is very likely that we may not know, at least as it relates to the presidential election, who is the winner on November 6th. But leading up to the election, Dr. Brooks Davis, it is very, very difficult for you to turn on the television, even if you want to watch a football game or the World Series, without seeing election commercials against your person, for your person, calling the other person names. The only way that you can really do that perhaps is if you were watching a streaming service. Oh, I'm sorry. No, you can't do it then, because when you turn on the streaming service, there's a commercial at the beginning of the streaming service. And depending on whether or not you have premium streaming will determine whether or not even your favorite I Love Lucy or Good Times or What's Happening Now, Telling My Age, whatever it is, the commercials will still be political. So, Dr. Brooks Davis, can you help somebody address that? I mean, do you just have to turn off everything and sit outside on the front porch?
I don't think you have to do that, but I do think you have to be honest around how long am I going to watch these news stations? So if I know, to your point, I'm watching I Love Lucy and there's going to be a commercial. I'm watching my Dallas Cowboys yesterday lose.
Yeah,
whatever
well,
your team might be.
and that's probably even more anxiety for you Cowboys fans. But you know that
to claim them.
You know what?
You should not do that to yourself.
No, as I was saying, okay, I watch Ravens too, but hey, with that being said, if I know that there are certain things I have no control over, then I need to make sure that I protect my mind and my peace as much as I can with what I do have control over. So if I want to watch what is the weather going to be like this morning, and I'm going to turn on the local news, I know it won't be long before they're going to talk about the elections. So I'm going to watch what I need to watch, and then I'm going to have to turn it off. And then I'm going to have to plan throughout this period, particularly this home stretch, that either I'm not going to watch television, I might turn on one of my radio stations, or I may turn on music and play it. I may take a walk, but give myself a break from the news and do so in a way where I can control how much I take in of this repeated cycle of news.
What do you say, Dr. Menzies, about trying to get away from it? Because for some people, it certainly is a magnet, and some people may not even realize the impact that it is actually having on them.
Yeah, I mean, your notion to unplug and go sit on the porch for a while is not a bad idea. In fact, it's actually a good suggestion. I do it every night. I go and sit out on my porch where it's quiet, and most of the time it's quiet. Every now and then, we get the hood life experience, but most of it's quiet. And
yet another thing to be stressed about.
But sometimes this election stuff can be more stressful. At least in the hood, you know what to expect. These politicians, they constantly throwing curveballs, sliders, knuckleballs. A Hail Mary like yesterday. I mean, it's all kind of stuff that they pull out the bag of tricks. And so, it's a good idea to unplug, but that takes a strong will. And as you pointed out, Harold, some people don't even realize they're so caught up in this rapture. We have an addiction to drama. We've been been well primed for drama. You know, our tastes and our appetites have been whet for drama now. And so this is a part of their daily soap opera, except for this is the reality TV on a global stage at this point. And so I think that, especially when you think that the stakes are as high as people are presenting them to be, like the end of the world, the last election, you know, what does that mean? You know, we've got to change the country, dictatorship, you know, all these different things are being thrown out there. And they used to be dog whistles, meaning that they were inaudible to the typical person. But now it's just blatant with a megaphone. And I think that some of that is designed to draw people into the daily drama of it. You know, shout out to the Daily Drum. But it's like, it's designed to pull us in. You know, we have mental health degrees, you know, Dr. Brooks Davis and I. And, you know, I would dare to say that there are people out here who understand how to manipulate human behavior in ways that we have probably never been exposed to in our practical life and in our training. And so those people are behind the machine of, you know, propagating the information, manipulating the emotional states. And so it is to be done subtly to where people don't realize it's happening. So what I would suggest, as you suggested earlier, is unplug. You know, as Dr. Brooks Davis is saying, you know, take your breaks, go in for your intentional information. You want the news, you want the weather, you want the sports updates, get that and get out of there. Don't constantly be plugged in. And one good way to do that, and I talk to my students all the time, is take these earbuds out your ears sometime. Sit your phone down sometimes. Turn that TV on mute. Turn the volume down or off. You know, those are all good ways for us to get back centered within ourselves, get a good read on ourselves to see where we are within those spaces, and also in the absence of that stimulation.
Dr. Brooks Davis, are the people that you serve, are they actually talking about election season stress?
They are, and in different ways, right? So you hear them talk about Project 2025. That's what they will talk often about, you know, repeating what they hear on the news. They will talk about some of our clients during the COVID crisis. We saw an increase of persons coming into work who talked about a lot of the racial concerns they were having on their job with supervisors. Now with the election, what this has done is exacerbated it even more. And so some of our clients now are saying, how is the president going to impact my day to day? And it's further fostering, you know, there might have been in communities of color, there was this notion that you can't trust the government because of systems, because of different things that have happened, right? What has happened now, though, is people are like, they're really saying it in real time. It's not something that's hidden. It's not institutional. It is real time. And there's a fear of that. Like, how can elections be this close when we have so much hate? And again, as Dr. Menzies says, I'm not suggesting it's more on one side than the other. It's prominent now. We're paying attention to it more now. But I do think there's more of an aggressiveness with it now that perhaps maybe we had not seen in my lifetime previously. Certainly my parents' lifetime is familiar to them. So even in some of our older adults, what I see is fear and anxiety because from their position, they've lived it. And their concern is we're going back. And then at the same token, I would say their concern is that the younger generation does not understand. So I say there's a lot of concern and angst that they have that we're going to go back, and young people don't understand they have the power to help us from not going back by getting out to vote. So I see that in our older clients and adults that we serve as well.
You know, one of the things that I've noticed, and I invite you both to share if you've noticed the same thing. I noticed this particular phenomenon going all the way back to 2016, going to my doctor's office, going to a repair shop for my car, any place where you need to sit and wait. And if there is a television, and as I said, starting as far back as 2016, they stopped turning the news on. They wouldn't even put sports on. The thing that I now see are home repair shows, because home repair shows, you got to dig really, really deep in order to make a home repair show even remotely political. Dr. Menzies, have you noticed that at all or not? And what are your thoughts about that?
It's interesting that you point that out. I was at my mechanic the other day, too often in the past few weeks, but what I've noticed, I intentionally made a mental note that, wow, on the TV, but it's always like some daytime talk show, like, one of the panels. And, I did take note of that. Like, wow, this is a very interesting thing to have on in the shop. But it was, of course, those can go political. But I do echo and agree with your sentiment that it would be very difficult to make a home improvement show, DIY type of show, political. And I think that that's a very astute observance, to see that they maybe are intentionally being neutral, as to make it not a polarizing space. This is a break from all of that. We're going to be very practical here. We're going to talk about flipping these houses, although we could talk about the socioeconomic, background of people who are able to flip houses like on some of those shows. But yeah, I do see what you're saying, but I haven't experienced that myself.
What about you, Dr. Brooks Davis?
Yeah, the nail salon, cooking channels.
Okay.
Yep. So I have noticed more cooking shows. I've also noticed more shows that are just playing music and they have like the spa background images that are floating. I've noticed more of that. But to your point, definitely a lot of those bake-offs, things of that nature that you would never see in the salon before, you're seeing it more now.
Interesting. And although, even in the cooking shows, you could have a red velvet cake. Oh, no. Or a blueberry pie. Oh, no. Instead of going to a big name baker, you may go to an independent bakery.
Hey, they're slipping it in.
Yeah, that's one thing. So, but with all of these things happening, and obviously it makes us realize that everyone is acutely aware of this. So, Dr. Brooks Davis, I would even venture to say that even in your daily comings and goings, particularly if you live in a diverse community or move around in a racially diverse community, do you find yourself, even without direct interaction, wondering that whether or not the person in line with you at the grocery store, what are their political leanings? Is this person a Harris supporter? Is this person a Trump supporter? And could that kind of penetrating thought process also cause stress when perhaps in the past you never even looked at the person in line with you?
That's a very good question. I would say I've been traveling like the past 6 weeks. And in my travels, what I have noticed, and again, not knowing what side a person might be, I have noticed that boundaries, right? Personal boundaries and space has been so very different. Looks are very different now. And you don't know where people are. You don't take the time to ask because, again, that might seem, but how people view you and assumptions people are making are very different now. And I think a lot of people are on edge, regardless of your political affiliation, regardless of your degree. I think there's a sensitivity now that maybe I know even for myself that I experienced that. Whereas at one point people were kind, now it's almost like you're on edge. And oh my goodness, if you wear anything that's supporting one candidate or the other, there's assumptions that automatically come with that. So if you're a person of color, people assume you're voting Democrat. If you're a person, if you're a Caucasian, you're voting Republican. And that's not the case. But even though, as Dr. Menzies says, we're mental health professionals, we know this, but we're human too. And so as a human, I find myself kind of looking and wondering, just because the rhetoric is amped up and in some more so in some spaces than others. And I've noticed that there's an emboldening that some people have that wasn't there maybe 10 years ago. I'm not saying they didn't feel it, but they surely didn't show it like they do now.
Yeah. And what do you do about something like that, Dr. Menzies, where you are in a space where you're thinking more about the politics of someone in the grocery store as opposed to whether or not you buy three and get them for $10.
Right.
And what do you recommend for people who may attempt to engage you, even in a casual comment?
Yeah.
And this is let me be really clear. I was using my mother in this case. Growing up in the grocery store, my mother would and did talk to anyone. It would start with, boy, these green peppers really look good today, in the produce section. And 15 minutes later, she and the lady who's also looking at the green peppers could have a full conversation about everything in the produce section.
Mm-hmm.
But now in 2024, that can take a turn.
Mm-hmm.
And how do you engage or not engage someone who may make assumptions about you, as Dr. Brooks Davis was just saying?
Yeah, so I mean, I have a real time situation. I was getting a smoothie up in Rockville last week, headed to one of our local airports. And
what color was the smoothie?
Right.
What color were the sprinkles that you were?
It was purple.
Good answer.
Good answer.
Blueberries and strawberries in it now. But like really, so I was in there waiting for it. And an older white woman, she came past and I said, good morning. Cause I'm like your mom. I talk to everybody, man. I have a full blown conversation. I'm talking to people and I don't care all that other stuff. But so I said, hey, good morning. She said, hey, good morning. She said, go Kamala. It was just an assumption. Like, she's like, kind of, like, I see you, brother. And I'm like, hey,
and she pronounced the name wrong, but
right. And that's how she said it, to go Kamala. So I just kind of nodded at her because, I'm not going to engage to your point. And so then later on, when I finally get to the airport, I happen to be buying a T-shirt, for a relative, and it's a Vice President Kamala Harris T-shirt. And so the Black woman selling it to me, she started going on and on about how she can't take 4 more years of this and how so she was actually leaning more towards Trump. And so, it was very interesting, very, very interesting irony there. The white woman, go Kamala, and the Black says, I can't take no more of this. And so it's as Dr. Brooks Davis was saying, this was atypical for what the stereotype says it should be. And both of them talking to me, as if, as a Black male, I'm that neutral ground, which is how it's been being presented now. It's like both candidates are boasting or concerned with obtaining the Black male vote. The Black male allegiance, which is a whole nother conversation that we don't have to engage here. But it was very interesting. So even with the second woman, my mindset went to, hey, sis, you might not want to be waxing political with customers, because sometimes they're looking for any reason to clip people like us, It's kind of like that. That was where I engaged. Said, I ain't worried about that. I was like, hey, you like it, I love it. And I got on about my business. But the point was I wasn't going to be pulled into these political discussions, which can be polarizing. But to me, it's also indicative of the stress that people are feeling, because she was clearly stressed. And the white woman, I think she was just trying to say, hey, we got your backs, kind of let me know, like, I'm one of the good ones type of thing. And I'm just like, and this is the positioning that people feel they have to take right now because it is so volatile. I mean, you ride down the expressway. I was coming in through the Cincinnati airport once recently, and the entire expressway was almost shut down coming out of the airport because there was a caravan, of Trump supporters. They had locked down the entire 275 Beltway that day. And so it's so much of that. And it does preempt many of our conversations. It has people hesitant to engage, but then also, like Dr. Brooks Davis said, it emboldens people. And that's the word that I've been using. If Trump wins, they're going to be emboldened. If he loses, they're going to be enraged. And so all of the anxiety and fear and concern is not unfounded. A lot of it is founded in real life possibilities and probabilities, high probabilities. And so, I think it's Dr. Wells, and she says all the time, it's good to have a healthy sense of paranoia and awareness.
So Dr. Brooks Davis, do you think that people can stay informed, stay engaged during this political season without compromising their mental well-being? Can both things exist in the same space?
Yes, I do, because I think it goes back to what Dr. Mincy said. So anxiety and stress is not a negative, right? It's a part of life. It's what we all have. It's the degree to which we allow it to consume us that can take us from one place to the next. So can we be healthy, have a great mental health outlook, and also be informed? Yes, we should be informed, because we need to be informed to make informed decisions when we cast our ballot. Right. So we need to be informed. We need to do the research. But at the same token, we need to, as we've said before, know how to unplug, take a walk and said, okay, I'm good for this for a moment. I may need to watch it every other day, but not every day. I don't have to have it in the morning. So yes, I think the two can exist, and they need to, because we need to be aware of what's happening so we can make informed decisions, help others know what they need to know in order to cast that vote. So yes, I think we can do both. And I think if we get to a place where it becomes overwhelming and we don't know, that's when you reach out and you speak with a therapist so that you can process it. And at that point, maybe some of the anxiety and fear that's being exacerbated now is really beyond just the election. There were other things that happened that we saw, fears that we had, and what this election has done is exacerbated that, right? And so we have to now unpeel that onion, so to speak, and find out what's under all of this anxiety that we're feeling. So I think that if it goes a little bit too far where we're not eating, sleeping, we're dreaming about it, then we need to speak with someone. But yes, you can have it and still be healthy.
I think you made a really good point also, Dr. Brooks Davis. When you think about at the height of the pandemic, this bothered any and everyone, because you could not necessarily get away from it, not only as it related to the fear of getting sick, but even the isolation that all were forced to endure, and the mental impact that it had on people, and arguably even some of the effects that are still being felt today with our children trying to catch up in school, those of us who have lost loved ones, to the disease, and even to this day, concerns about whether you should get your vaccinations updated, and the fact that before it was free, now you got to pay for it. And so I think that there are always, as you said, there are always going to be certain anxieties. But Dr. Menzies, what do you think moving forward between now and November 5th and even December, when a lot of votes are supposed to be certified and the like, how can people best address these issues?
Yeah, I think that coming to terms with the reality that we will not know, November the 5th, November the 6th, what the outcome is going to be, and in anticipation of this possibly being drawn out, I think it's very, very important for people to grasp that aspect of reality, because it's kind of like, I was driving the other day using GPS, and, sitting in traffic, not knowing how long you're going to be sitting there is one thing. But if you can turn on your GPS and it tells you, now you're going to still get there in 20 minutes, and you can see the map and see that it's red just for the next half a mile. Because I'm thinking, I'm about to get off of this expressway. It's like, wait, man, it's only like 15 cars up, you out of this stuff. But I'm ready to get off the expressway, find an alternate route, and it wasn't necessary. So I think that having the proper view of the landscape ahead of us is very, very powerful. And it will help us to relax some of the anxiety, because the unknown becomes a bit knowable for us. And a lot of anxiety is around the unknown. And so to put as much known into the equation as possible. And then also something we talked about earlier is just realize that it's not about to be the end of the world, at least not because of the election, right? If you are, if you're grinding on your job, putting in overtime, you're likely to still be doing that after the election, right? Your mortgage is still going to come due, unless there are just some drastic changes that were going to occur anyway beyond either one of these candidates. It should pretty much still be business as usual. I mean, if we look at the previous transitions, yes, there were slight shifts or long-term shifts that occurred over time, but it was very rarely doom and gloom, like, September 11th for tax in 2001, right?
Yeah.
And so I just think that just having that grasp on reality and recognizing when we may begin to find signs of obsession, we're starting to obsess over certain things, because that creates a lot of anxiety when you're constantly wondering, oh my God, what's going to happen? Who's going to win? Is it going to happen? Is somebody going to lose? Somebody going to die? All these different things it creates, and it starts to build up or exacerbate that anxiety for us. And I think that when you can recognize those subtle signs, then as Dr. Brooks Davis said, seek out some help, whether it's on a professional level with a counselor and a therapist, start to communicate with friends that can have a neutral listening session with you and not necessarily arguing back and forth with you. Tried to have tried to have a conversation with a colleague the other day, and I was being critical of some of the things being presented on one side of the aisle. And I just had to stop my colleague, like, hold on, man. I said, try to have a conversation with me and not arguing against him, right? Because it turned into an argument against one of the candidates. And I'm like, I don't represent that candidate. I'm just asking questions about this particular policy and term, but they were unable to separate that. But as soon as I was able to point that out, they were able to bring it back down. Like, wow, I didn't even realize that, that I'm against that at all costs, So I think the more that we can recognize, the more awareness that we can develop, understand the terrain ahead of us as much as possible. I think that those are some really good places to start. It's a really good foundation to rest your feet on.
Dr. Brooks Davis, I'll let you have the final word.
Well, I think certainly I would agree that what we need to do, I think that was a good analogy of being able to say that life will not end as a result of who wins the White House, right? There is still personal responsibility that we must take in terms of our own mental health and well-being. And so if we allow ourselves to fall into who's in the White House or who's the elected official, we're going to sway often. But instead, if we just kind of guide our course, understand our values, understand what we believe in, then I think we will do well and speak with others. And of course, I will say, come out and it's a free opportunity to engage before the election with other persons and just have a good time. And that's what we're seeking to do, to allay some of those fears and anxieties.
As my mother would always say, we're going to be all right. She is the eternal optimist. No matter what happens, we're going to be all right. So listen, thank you so much, Dr. Frederica Brooks Davis, Dr. Jeff Menzies. I appreciate your time, and we will be in touch.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, man.
That is the Daily Drum for this Monday, October 28th. I'm Harold Fisher. Good night.